So, Dave, we we had one of those weird little discussions at the dinner table the other night. I knew you'd love this one. The kids
Alrighty.
were asking about how they got their names. I don't know whether you've ever had this discussion.
All right.
And Carolyn and I both started laughing.
Why do you ask, Bilbo?
Ask your brother Frodo. He'll tell you all about it.
I don't know, Anakin. I do feel bad about your name from time to time.
And Carolyn and I started laughing because we really struggled with boys' names. And as fate would have it, we ended up having two boys. We struggled with boys. Girls' names, we had lists and lists that we agreed with. But every time we tried to have this discussion about boys' names, it went like this. I'd say, hey, how about Carl? And she'd say, no, I dated a Carl in high school. He was a real jerk. And she'd say, how about Barry? And I'd say, oh, no, Barry beat me up in junior high. We can't do that. And then I'd pitch a name, and it was some guy who was a jerk to her. And she'd pick a name, and it was some guy that beat me up. We went through did you get these books that you take out from the library?
The 1,001 baby names or most popular baby names of the year.
We went from Albert to Xavier, and we couldn't agree on them because they were either somebody that was a jerk to her or somebody that beat me up. We were all the way to the end of the book, and we couldn't agree on a single one.
I like that. All the name reservations that Brad Geiger has. We're learning a lot about Brad Geiger's childhood. It was like, nope, that was a swirly. That was a wedgie. That was a wet willy. Like, they're all kids that just beat up Brad.
It was like, what do you think about Frank? Are you kidding me? The wedgies that guy gave? Forget about it.
No, that guy was a swirly master. I'm not, no. I do like, though, the idea that in a book of 1,001 names, 999 had beat up Brad. And then we're like, finally, we found a name that said...
Yeah, the one name we could agree on was, finally we came down to names that could be like variable, because we didn't know who the kid was going to be. They were still, they hadn't even made their appearance on the planet yet. And we didn't know. So names like that we ended up with were like Alexander and Maxwell. Alex can be an Alex, an Alexander. He could be a Xander from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We learned
if he wanted to be
one.
in a teen romance, yep.
And if he wanted to take over the world, he could be Lex. That's a name with flexibility. Same thing with Maxwell. He could be a Maxwell. He can be a Max. Unfortunately, he ended up becoming a Maxie. We just started calling him Maxie around the house. And I was chaperoning a field trip, and I called him Maxie, and I got this for the first time in my life. Don't call me Maxie. You're my little Maxie. I can't not call you Maxie. He's like, Dad, stop that. So this is what's coming for you. This is what's coming for you.
I gotta say though, a couple things that I like about the story. One, I love that because people think that it's easy, but you get two people in a room. And names will trigger the weirdest memories. And also, my wife and I would have this thing where we would pitch a name, Brad. And we would say, and no one would be offended by this, I'm just throwing out a name. We'd be like, how about Larry? And then the other one of us would go, no, absolutely not. Larry works at a coffee shop at a truck stop. Like, we would have very specific criticisms about why. Like, the other one would be like, well, how about Sebastian? No, Sebastian serves coffee at a hipster coffee shop, and it's overpriced coffee, and he's a jerk to you. So no, we're not. Like, these are not people that we've met, Brad. My wife and I, as artists, would like create the life of the name of the person that we're, and it was a fully realized person. We'd be like, no, I'm not naming them Harriet. Harriet is the name of a librarian that's a jerk and that refuses to help people find the right book. It was all hyper-specific criticisms about why we couldn't do this or that name, which was the weirdest thing.
Well, the bad thing is, did this happen to you? All the really good names I had already used in my comic strip. I love the idea of naming a boy Mackenzie so he could be a Mac. There's a wide swath there between a Mackenzie and a Mac. Those are two very different types of person there. And he could be either, but I'd already used that in Greystone Inn. Carolyn says, you can't name one of our sons after your comic strip character. So all of the names that I had come up with for Greystone Inn were forbidden because then you're naming them after a comic character.
Yeah, thankfully I didn't have Drive running at the time because there was no way I was going to name my kid Nosh. That doesn't work. That's that's not going to work.
That's pretty mean thing to do to a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Mackenzie, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Strip. Can you imagine me as a Mackenzie?
I'm having a hard time. I can't imagine you as a Mac either, so it's not going to work either way.
So here's my problem with names. I immediately imagine the person. Here's what Mackenzie does for a living. Mackenzie edits books for a failing poetry publisher, and they can barely make their rent in Brooklyn, but they put out 10 titles a year, and Mackenzie's doing his best, but he's just like, life is not working for him. He wears these sweaters that have little triangles on them. Anyway, that's Mackenzie, everybody.
And meanwhile, Mac is a pipe fitter, and he's got a lot of T-shirts with double entendres.
Just a lot of T-shirts that just say Slayer on them. That's Mac.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by
we didn't finish.
You completely sidetracked us. Did you even say that, Dave? Did you even say that you're the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Stripped?
I don't know. Anyway, I'm Dave Kellett, the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Strip.
Oh, scintillating. And this hour's hour, we're off to a horrible start, Dave. This week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So, Dave, let's talk apologies, my friend. I owe an apology. And I want to get this. I want to get this out of the way right at the top of the show. Do you remember a couple shows ago when I was so excited to bring you that story about a artist that had turned the tables on some unscrupulous T-shirt vendors who were using social media bots to scrape content? Remember that story?
Oh, right. The artist turned it against them by saying like, don't print with this company. They're jerks or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a bunch of those T-shirt companies the next day had kind of shut down. They're back now, but it was fun to watch them suffer a little bit. Well, in my excitement to bring you that story, I did not do my due diligence, and I used the wrong pronouns for that person, and I regret that carelessness, and I publicly apologize to that person. Their correct pronouns are they and them. And to make this an even more egregious error, that was spelled out very clearly on their Twitter page where I was getting all this information and following this action. So my apologies to the person behind the Twitter handle, Nana Dukin. My apologies for that. I will be much better at that in the future. I am ashamed that I didn't check that better.
Well, to put some context on that, the world needs to know Brad's eyeballs are very old. They're very old eyeballs, and asking those eyeballs to read, that's a when you say that's a lot, Brad, at this point it's hard to get out of bed. It's like it's enough. It's enough to get the slippers on and pad over to where the medicines are kept. I think.
And then make sure I'm taking all my pills in the right order. But even that, I can't even.
I've got to take the heart pill before the blood pressure pill because the blood pressure pill just gets my thumper going.
No, I wish I could accept even that but I can't even. Even old eyes can go over there and look and get those pronouns and. Well,
good on you for doing it, Brad. Good on you. I appreciate that. That's
so. I will be better about that in the future.
Well, then jumping right in, Brad, for this week, we have some exciting and personal advice from Jackie Estrada, who very kindly runs the Eisner Awards. Brad, you do know that it's Eisner season, of course.
Oh, yeah. The deadline is March 13th, correct?
March 13th to submit for the Eisners. And if you're producing work that you are proud of and would like to be considered for the Eisners, Brad and I would highly suggest it. You can go over to comiccon.org and find, it's a one-page PDF. And I highly recommend you look through it and see what categories you might qualify for. And, of course, my long-running critique of that there's no short-form webcomic category for the Eisners still stands. It's a bit of a bummer. But they did at least add a digital comic, and they have long-form webcomic, so that's good. But there might be other categories that you fall under, whether you're doing journalism or published a book for the year, that kind of thing. So Brad, tell me your strategies for the Eisners.
Well, one thing I want to jump in real quick on is what's the difference between a web comic and a digital comic, right? That could cause some confusion. So let's talk about that just for a second. A web comic is going to be a comic that you are updating on the web, right? You've got to go to that website for the different updates. It's done in real time, week after week, day after day. That's a web comic. A digital comic is like an e-comic or an e-book. So I'm submitting Evil Inc. under both categories because it is a web comic and because I've collected different chapters and different stories into e-comics. I'm going to submit the e-comic version of Evil Inc. as a digital comic and the Evil Inc. Website as the web comic.
Right. And now, just to clarify for everybody at home, the reason why Brad can do that is that Evil Inc. is a long-form, continuing arc webcomic. So if Brad was doing Gag a Day, if he was doing Family Circus, oh my God, Brad doing Family Circus. If Brad was doing Family Circus as a webcomic, oh boy.
It would be a very different strip.
Boy. The Not Me ghost would be very different, I think, in that comic. Or was it Not I? I forget. What was it? Not Me or Not I?
Yeah, not me. I think.
Anyway, what I'm getting at is if he was doing a Gag a Day, it would not qualify for the webcomic category in the Eisners. It can only be long form or continuing story arcs that can be submitted. But I wanted to talk specifically today, Brad, about the Eisners because I reached out to Jackie Estrada, who, as I said, very kindly has run the Eisners for years and years and years. Is incredibly knowledgeable about the width and breadth of comics and is frankly an incredibly nice person to run the Eisners so wonderfully for all these years. But I was talking with Beth here in the studio as we were prepping our Eisner submission, and I said, God, what a logistical nightmare it must be for Jackie Estrada to get all these different books from all these different publishers from all over the world in 19,000 different formats, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought, as a public service both to comics, but also, frankly, to Jackie, I would reach out to her. And I said, I basically asked her, Brad, can you share a few bits of advice that would honestly make your life easier and make sure that the processing and filing of all these different submissions gets handled in an efficient way that makes everybody in comics happier, right? And so Jackie very kindly emailed back with 3 bits of advice. And so I'm going to read those out to everybody, Brad. Number 1, carefully read the call for entries. This is the PDF that I mentioned before. It's only 1 page, takes about 5-10 minutes to read. Sit down with the highlighter and go through it. The highlighter will be your friend. So what she says is, for instance, it states on the call for entries that only 1 copy of each publication should be submitted. But many publishers, and this is surprising me, publishers do this, but many publishers still send 6 or more copies. So it's like, I like the idea that, like, Brad, if you're submitting 1 book for best humor publication, but also for best artist, right? You think, there's a part of you that thinks, oh, I'll submit 2 physical copies so that they can both be. But what she's saying is like, no, look, we got 19,000 books in this room. The judges can figure out, once you've submitted the piece of paper that says, please judge this 1 book for both best cartoonist and best humor publication. That's all you need to do, submit 1. So that's number 1 from Jackie. Number 2, the main other advice I would give is to be professional. I have received submission letters handwritten on scraps of paper. Physical letters should be on paper that I know. It's like, do better, other cartoonists. Do better. It's like, hey, I found this old newspaper and I used a Sharpie and I wrote my Eisner submission on it. She says,
got this on a Post-it note.
Yeah, I hope this is okay. I used my old receipt from Quiznos and I wrote on the back of it. She says physical letters should be on paper that is easily copied, and copied is the word you want to focus on there for reasons you can figure out, and preferably single-spaced. Digital letters should be in a format that is easily accessible, such as Word or PDF. So don't send your 20-year-old Quark Express file that no one can print out. Because basically,
or your,
remember, there's 5
pages.
Yeah.
Right?
There's
My
there's
students
one.
at UArts do that to me all the time. You know, I'll get something in a dot pages, and it's like, I've got it. I've got a Mac. I can open it, but now I've got to open that up. Just give me a PDF. You know, and
Yeah.
make this stuff simple.
Make it easy. Like basically, take an extra 10, 20 minutes, read the instructions is what she's saying, and go
Yeah,
an extra mile to make it easy on the judges. Because remember, if you're frustrating them at any stage, that's not helping your cause, and it's not helping the overall
right.
process of getting the Eisners judged. So be cool, basically. And then the last point, number 3 from Jackie Estrada. Other than that, the only thing I would request is that comics not be bagged or boarded or shrink wrapped or otherwise packaged individually. And that is easy to figure out, Brad. Basically, they're getting 19,000 books. And if you can
Right.
imagine having to unbag, unboard, unshrink wrap 19,000
Yeah,
books,
that
your
gets old.
fingernails are getting tagged and torn. And also, you're just producing a ton of scrap around the office. So, those 3 reading the call for entries, a professional letter, and not having it bagged and board.
Yeah, so let's talk about sending sending that submission in. First of all, for most of us, like web cartoonists, we're going to be sending in an email that has our submission. All right.
Right, right.
So let's talk about the email submission, because certainly everything that Dave just got done saying is going to guide you through for the books that you're physically shipping in. Let's talk about the email submission for best web comic and best digital comic. I'm going to run this by you, Dave, because this is what I did this year. I got more into it than I've ever gotten before, trying to cover all my bases. So when I'm writing my email submission, not only am I pointing them to the Evil Ink website,
Okay.
I'm also pointing them to where a significant story from 2019 started, so they can start right at the storyline.
Gotcha.
I also send them the link to where that storyline started on Webtoons, where I'm
Smart. Yep.
mirroring my comic. And then also, I've taken all of the full page updates from 2019, every one of them, and I just put those into a PDF and attach the PDF as well, so that if they want to, they don't even have to go to the site. They can just pull that PDF up and path through every one of them.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, a part of it is just assume, like, you know how when you're emailing your parents or you're emailing someone who's older and you make things
Yeah.
very easy for them. I mean, I know that some of these judges are 20, 30, 40 years old and they're going to be tech savvy, but you can still take the same thing, make it easy for them. If they have a Webtoons account, they can jump right over there. If they have the website, they can jump in right there. And then my only other caveat to add, Brad, on this is under a broader scope, which is remember to stay cool on this. And by that, I
Yeah.
mean, I have talked to past Eisner judges and I have talked to past cartoonists in the industry. And the sad truth is that people, when they find out who the judges are, they will reach out to them individually, which is not
No,
cool. Yeah, they'll
no.
email them or they'll bother them at their comic book shop or their academic location, whatever they're at. And my advice to you is just don't be that thirsty. That feels like someone who hasn't had
Yeah.
a date in 9 years and is desperate for a Tinder date. Like, don't do that. And then also, if the stars open up and you get nominated to be an Eisner, don't lobby other cartoonists or other industry professionals. Don't you think,
Oh,
Brad? I mean,
God, no.
it's always like, don't do this. Don't do that. Either the work stands on its own and it's fine, or maybe it did stand on its own and for 1,000 subjective reasons people didn't vote for it. That's also okay. Remember, at the
Right.
end of the day, awards don't matter. Brad and I have
Yeah.
both won awards. We both nominated for awards. You wake up the next morning having to put in the same amount of work and trying
Hmm.
for the same amount of income.
Yeah.
Frankly, it's the work itself is the goal, not the award. So don't be too thirsty, as I said.
Yeah, and let your work stand on its own. So another thought that I had also is for best digital comic, make sure that you're sending them either the digital comic or a link through which they can get a free download to that comic. The whole point is make it easy as possible. And then what I did, Dave, that entire email, I copied that, brought that into a document that I could turn into a PDF with all the
Smart. Yep.
hyperlinks active. And linked the PDF too. So I've got the email, I've got a PDF, I've got in that PDF, it's got all of the 2019 Evil Ink comics. I've tried to cover the bases. In fact, give them maybe too much, because then they can just use whatever they want to use, right? And not use what they don't want to use.
Brad's method was so good that I actually stole Brad's method. I did. I did both the email and then the copied paste PDF, and the PDF dresses it up a little bit. It looks more like a cover letter for a resume, which is what Brad kind of did too. But again, same idea. Make it easy for them. Make it in duplicate ways. Whoever's processing the emails that day, if they want to take the email and print that out, fine. If they want to take the PDF and print that out, fine. But either way, best of luck. Do submit if you're doing pro work. Brad and I wish you all the best. And hopefully have a review of both the call for entries and Jackie's advice on this show. And good luck to you.
Dave, here's a $5 question from a Patreon backer, Scott, who writes in, I've noticed that both of you are intermittent with your update schedules. Do you think that affects your audience numbers? Do you have some tips on keeping readers engaged? How effective is RSS anymore? So there's actually kind of snuck in 3 of them, but it's all kind of under the same heading of intermittent updates.
Yes. So, all right. Well, let's take them one by one of those 48 questions that they snuck in. So question number 1, intermittent updates. So let's go back historically a little bit. The reason why Brad and I did 7 days a week at first was because newspapers did 7 days a week. And by God, Brad and I were going to show the world and those future syndicate editors that we were ready to be picked up. So we did 7 days a week, and look at our webcomic 7 days a week. And also, by the way, we didn't know it at the time, but it was also a faster way to cut our teeth and get better at cartooning by doing 7 days a week, right? But as time went on and we realized, oh, wait a minute, we're going to make a career online. We don't have to do 7 days a week. You found in the early 2000s, a lot of web cartoonists started dropping maybe Saturdays and Sundays because nobody was online on Saturdays and Sundays. They were all living their life. And then it got down to Monday through Friday. And what happened is, under the ad model, that was critical to keep those 5 days going because it was generating page views. And so cartoonists also maybe started putting their blog, remember Penny Arcade did this, their blog separate from their comic, because that generated 2 page views per visit rather than 1 page view. But then what happened is the ad model did something that's kind of unique and wonderful. It committed suicide. It went off a cliff. And so it became really unimportant, don't you think, Brad, to have those daily updates?
Well, back under the ad model, that's the why behind the what, right? And I always say, understand the why behind the what. The reason we had those updates was for ad views. Yep. Now, like Dave said, either by suicide or whether it was homicide from the ad blockers, one way or another, they're not a player anymore for most web cartoonists, and therefore it's not as imperative to have those daily updates. But also, as I've argued on this show before, the reading habits of your readers have changed. They're not coming to your site as much as they used to. They're getting most of their content on social media. And I've said before, it's like the difference between somebody that goes out and forages for food and somebody that's sitting in front of a smorgasbord with a conveyor belt where food is just constantly being passed by them and they reach out and grab whatever they want. That's the person you're trying to attract now. And it's not about the everyday update. You can have an intermittent update. In fact, I advise cartoonists all the time, don't even apologize for missing an update, because chances are 95% of your readership didn't notice you missed. They were so busy with the smorgasbord, filling their mouth with stuff. They didn't notice you missed. In fact, you called attention to a negative, which is a terrible idea.
Right.
The intermittent update is your friend. You don't have to keep doing, as long as you're putting good work, as long as that update has something significant that happens. In other words, no longer can you get away with doing a full page where somebody's running through the woods, 4 panels of different angles of this guy running through the woods. Well, no, that's not going to cut it anymore, because again, you have to realize every time somebody's exposed to your work, it might be for the first time that they've ever seen it. And 4 panels of somebody running through the woods is not going to intrigue them. So the intermittent updates is I think dead, or I'm sorry, the intermittent updates is the new way to go, and so much the better. That's going to play to your advantage as a web cartoonist.
Yeah, I think the way Brad structured it at first is the most brilliant way to do it, which is you always want to look for the why behind the what, because that will give you, in fact, this is good for when you're trying to sleuth out why other cartoonists are doing certain things right now, or why did this business that prints comics do it this way and not that way. When you look behind the surface of why they're doing it, you'll understand what they're doing and what their strategy is. So, for example, when Brad and I were first getting started, the why was we need a lot of people to see these pages so that we can get a few micro pennies from each one of them so that it'll add up to 1,000, 2,000, whatever it was a month, that kind of thing of advertising.
Through ads,
and then to a small, tiny percentage of those people, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5%, probably more like 1, we would sell a T-shirt to. Or if we were one of the lucky, young, plucky web cartoonists, we might scrape together a few bucks and print a book. And I remember in 1999 or 2000 when someone was brave enough and we would try to sell that online or at comic book shops, and that's how we made our living. And then what happened is, as the ad model fell apart because of pop unders, pop overs, sound, audio, viruses, and then eventually because of ad blocking, as that model completely fell apart, it just so happens, and thank God for it, that Patreon and Kickstarter, that distributed fundraising model, was picking up steam just at the same time. And so the reason why we are going to more intermittent things is that we don't need that constant drug feed of comics feeding an ad system. That doesn't matter anymore. What we need is to build a relationship. That's all. So you just want to produce enough intermittently to continue the relationship, to keep them in their mind, to keep them in their feed, to keep them in their weekly reads, so that you also have enough to produce a book from time to time, which is great. You're getting the Patreon money, which is great. You're getting an occasional Kickstarter project, which is great. And so that's the why behind the what.
Yeah.
I think Brad hit the nail on the head for that.
Yeah, and there was a couple other questions there that we should probably just address really quickly, and I think we can knock these over easily. Do you think that affects your audience numbers? No. If it did, I wouldn't do it. It's as simple as that. If I was doing intermittent updates and I was losing audience, I would stop doing intermittent updates. That's very simple. And how effective is RSS? Not effective. You cannot. We had somebody else from Patreon write us in and says, "How do you keep saying RSS is dead? I'm using it." Well, that's great that you're using it. The headline is your readers are not using it. I still have an RSS feed for my comic. It's still out there. It's still useful for different approaches, but you cannot count on RSS to bring readers to your site. It's just not going to happen.
And the reason why, let's talk about that for a second. RSS still exists. We still use it. I still have it on both my sites like Brad. I still use that RSS feed to feed into my MailChimp, which then goes out to my mailing list directory, of all those readers. So yes, it absolutely still serves a purpose. But here's the thing. If RSS is like one of those technologies that if it's not actively growing, well, then it's kind of dying. And RSS is not actively growing because a lot of the big tech things are not servicing RSS anymore. Like Google, when they killed their servicing of RSS, that put a real big blow on how many people of mine were reading Sheldon or Drive via RSS. Because if it's not easy you always have to imagine it for an older reader. If it's not easy for an older, non-tech savvy person to get it, they're not going to go seek out the one obscure bit of software that can bring RSS into their life. If it's not in the 2 bits of software they already use, they're not going to use it. That kind of thing. And so that's kind of what happened to RSS. Is it still usable? Absolutely. Do people still use it? Absolutely. Is it easy for the average new person to discover and adopt into their life? Not so much. You kind of, for the most part, you kind of have to jump through a little hoops here or there. So anyway, I think that kind of puts a button on it, don't you think, Brad?
Absolutely. And for your last question, do you have tips on keeping readers engaged? Go to any ComicLab episode where we talk about the 4 C's of social media. That's how you keep your readers engaged. Dave, we've got another $5 Patreon question here coming in from Max.
All right.
And it says, "Thanks for the great podcast. I always love listening and learning. I was curious about what both your opinions are regarding dedicating a page of a comic to a character introduction sheet. In other words, a full page that introduces a small illustrational bust of a character and then a one-sentence description about that character below. I'd love to know if you think they add or subtract to a comic, and if it's better to introduce your readers to characters as the comic progresses or before the comic begins. Dave, what do you think? Character introduction page in the comic.
Well, I just want to clarify this. They're saying that it's in the comic, right? It's not an about page that's a separate web page or back a book type thing. They're saying it's like,
that's what Max is saying.
You're going from page 6 to page 7.
Dedicating a page of the comic.
Huh. Okay. Well, I don't immediately love it, but I think if you did it in a stylistic way, maybe it could work. But for the most part, I think people like to come to know a character naturally, which is all the cues we talked about actually on a previous show, which is what do they say? How do they act? How do they dress? How do they react to outside stimuli? How do they react to outside people? That's how people mainly like to enjoy coming to know a character. It's the most pleasant way. Now, there are movies, and you can think of them, that when Brad Geiger makes a sudden appearance, it's sudden freeze frame, and you get like 3 fast facts about Brad Geiger. Like you can, I can't. No movie is jumping to my mind, but you can imagine a stylistic movie that's had that, where like a new character walks in, and then suddenly it's ba-da-ba-ba-da, and it's Brad Geiger, right? Yeah, exactly. It almost feels like something in the 60s or 70s, that technique, and I don't know why I resonate that as 60s or 70s, but it does to me. Anyway, I don't know that I would recommend it, but I think you're better served by doing it the traditional way. Brad, what do you think?
Max, you're making a big mistake in doing it this way, and I'll tell you why. You're assuming that your readers are coming in on page 1 and reading page 2 and page 3 and page 4, and that's not the way it's happening, again, for the reasons of the first topic of the show that we talked about. Your readers might just get exposed to you on page 7. And it's up to page 7 to attract them and to engage with them. And then maybe 9 chances out of 10, they're probably coming in, reading page 7 and then page 6 and then 5. And then they're like, oh, okay, there's something interesting going on here. I'll jump over to page 1. They're not reading these pages in order because they're coming in at all kinds of different points during the publishing process of your webcomic. So putting it in the comic is hiding it. However, I am a big fan of having an about page on your website. In other words, having a page where somebody can click on it and get a little synopsis of the story. They can get that information about the characters that you talked about. I'm a big fan of the about page. I am not so excited about hiding it in an interior comic page.
And also remember, Max, that you might be putting too much emphasis on how much the reader is desperate to find out about this character right now in the story. I can't enjoy the story unless I know everything about this character, right? Like, just because it's a well-known movie, I'll say it. Like when the droids crash land on Tatooine, right, after they've just escaped from Darth Vader in the first Star Wars, no one is going like, well, I would enjoy this movie, but who previously owned these droids? Where did these droids come from? Did a young boy build that droid?
And what kind of a droid is C-3PO? Yeah, and what kind of a droid is C-3PO anyway? Does he know languages or not? I need to know this.
I need to know if the small trash can droid can unlock a door. Can we establish that really quick? Does he or does he not have rockets in his legs? We need to establish that right now. I can't enjoy the story unless... So what I'm getting at there is that if the story is compelling, that's what's bringing your readers in at that moment. It's carrying along. The slow revelation and details, and frankly, sometimes the intentionally left out details of a character can actually make a story more engaging. Like, look at an Alfred Hitchcock movie. So I might say that you're very excited to share whatever character building or world building it is around this character. I get it. But if you're focusing on making a good story and slowly dribbling out things about the character, 9 times out of 10, I think that's the way to go. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So, Brad, our sponsor for today, once again, is Sideshow Collectibles. And I got to tell you, I've developed a delightful relationship with Sideshow because, A, I love their stuff, but also they've had me out to do both a couple of shows at their facility and also to tour it a couple of times. And it is a playground of creativity out there. It is a fantastic. The next time you are out, you've got to come visit because it is amazing over there.
I really want to do that because I've watched those interviews and you can tell you're having a great time. It's a lot of fun. Plus, the interviews are really. I've kind of become a geek about this ever since doing podcasts and stuff. It's well produced. It's well done, and the interviews are very enjoyable.
Oh, and if you're a nerd like we are, and you walk and see a half-size, beautiful sculpt of Yoda, you can't stop but go, "Oh, I like that Yoda." I always feel like as I'm leaving Sideshow, I should my hoodie sweatshirt is just bulging underneath because I'm like, and I'll take this, and I'll have that, and this is for me. This is all delightful.
You're just hoping they don't have security tags and a beeper at the door as you're making your run.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's super delightful that they are sponsoring ComicLab. And so specifically what's sponsoring this ComicLab is Sideshow's Sideshow podcast with the comedian Jeff May. And on that show, listeners can listen to a whole bunch of different comic creators, both writers and artists. And it's really fun because it's an industry perspective. So you can get people like Jody Houser of Doctor Who and Stranger Things, Scott Lobdell of X-Men, Top Cow's Henry Barajas, people like our friend Brandon Bird, who is an amazing artist here in Los Angeles. And each episode is delightful. It is funny and casual and engaging. And it's not like a boring, deep clinical dive, you know. It's more of that's kind of like what we do here. It's fun and engaging, and each episode kind of stands alone, you know?
Yeah, you're not going to get a didactic diatribe over there. You're going to get creators talking about things that they're fans of. You're going to hear people speaking passionately about the things that drive them. And not only like comic creators, they've got other comedians. Jeff May, of course, is a well-known comedian over there on the West Coast. But they're going to have other comedians, voice actors, models, an entomologist, for crying out loud. I mean, there's a little something for everybody over there. It's really amazing.
And, of course, you can listen to the podcast, but there's also full video playback available on Sideshow's YouTube channel. But the place to go to for all of this is over at side.show/ComicLab. So once again, that's at side.show/ComicLab. And we both encourage you to head over and check it out. And we thank them for sponsoring today's show.
Our next question is coming in from Michael, who says, I write a bit of fiction in lengths from short stories to novellas to novels, often with recurring characters. My question is, what, if any, of the business models for webcomics do you think might apply to the production of storytelling forms like serialized fiction or audio fiction? In other words, Dave, how can we apply the webcomics business model, quote unquote, to other kinds of creative endeavors?
That's interesting. What an interesting question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's tuck into this one. So, okay, you do definitely have the trick in that comics have the visual aspect, which is very merchandisable, both on books and T-shirts and bumper stickers and magnets and all sorts of things, right, Brad? I mean, I think we can all agree on that. So you don't have that, but let's think about it from like a Harry Potter terms. You do have, hopefully, creators, moments, quotes that can be merchandised. So there's that. But I think, honestly, the strongest lead-off point, the jumping-off point that I would give to a writer is the most transferable thing that web cartoonists do that a short story writer could use to their advantage is Patreon. Don't you think, Brad? Don't you think Patreon is the most transferable business model that a short story writer could do?
Absolutely. And specifically exclusive content on Patreon.
True.
It's going to be the driver there. But so here's what I want to talk about. It's not necessarily about selling bumper stickers and stuff like that. Really, what I would say I would want an author to focus on if they were going to do something like we're doing is to focus on using social media as a way to connect with your potential readers and get them to follow you so that they're actually interested in that book when you do put it out. Sam Sykes is a fantastic example of this. I follow him, as a matter of fact, and I think his Twitter handle is Sam Sykes Swears or something to that degree. You can look him up. But he does a wonderful job of doing the 4 C's of social media and talking about things that aren't necessarily his book, but then also he'll give you a little snippet. Here's a passage I'm working on right now. Here's a passage from another book that I think is interesting for the following reasons. In other words, he's using all that stuff, curation and compliments and commercial and content. I would say what you need to take away from the webcomics business model is this whole idea of using social media as a way of reader outreach and getting the potential readers interested in you as a person so that when you get a book, they're interested in that book.
Yeah, so building off of that, I would also highly recommend, as we would for web cartoonists, owning and controlling your own website. Even as a fiction author, having everything categorized and not just on your social media feed, but like, here are all my short stories. Here are all my short stories that are mysteries or horrors or romances. Here are all my novellas. Here are all my novels, ready to go, right? So you can point to someone, and that leads into my second point, which is if you're using social media, if you're using your website as a web cartoonist will do, one thing that you can also do with all this public sharing of free work is you can seek out for hire work, which a ton of web cartoonists do as well. And so as a short story writer, and I'll give you an example. I'm not in the market to find or hire or use a joke writer, right? But if I was, I know, Brad, what Twitter user I would go to because over the years, this one Twitter user, and I actually don't even remember if they're male or female or what. I just don't remember. But I remember their icon and I remember their URL or their handle. Because anytime I have a joke, anytime I have a comic, they one up it, which sometimes is annoying. But in this way, it's even more annoying because they're funnier than the ones I have. And I have started to notice and go, holy shit, this person is really funny and they're good with a turn of phrase. Their diction is amazing. Their vocabulary is amazing. And they are very good with the English language. And if I was in the market, like if I was an art director, if I was a creative director, if I was an editor, and I saw this person chiming in or sharing on social media regularly and needed to hire somebody, I'll be honest, Brad, I might hire them just because they're so dang funny. And I'm sure that's how cartoonists feel about, or that's how creative directors and hiring folks feel about web cartoonists and short novel writers.
Yeah. So there's a few things you can take away. Number one, the use of social media. Number two, using Patreon to support your work as it's ongoing and to support exclusive content. I would really, really suggest using exclusive content. But also, as you're posting things, you can say, this is for my Patreon backers. And then again, take that webcomics business model of always owning your own work and using that ownership to drive your business forward. So Dave, $5 question from Patreon says the following. When people comment on pictures of my art, comic strips, etc., I'm still quite early in all my career as an illustrator. I feel like I should reply to all of these comments. Right? Every time you get a comment, this person says, I feel like I should respond to it. They say, I'm curious as to which point in your career you felt like you couldn't respond to all those questions or comments because being so loved and famous, it took up too much of your day. Now, there's no one as loved or famous as Dave Kellett. What do you say? You can't respond possibly to every one of these comments, can you?
Well, this is a really good question because I actually agree with them that early on, and frankly, throughout your career, you engaging with kindness and with humor and with sociability is a key aspect towards building not just a fan, but a fan relationship. Like someone who's a reader, but who will go out of their way, frankly, to support Brad Geiger because I still remember when Brad Geiger took the time for me, right? That kind of thing, right? And I have found that it is most effective in person. Like if I give someone, with all genuineness, time at a comics convention when they come up to the table, and give them a great sketch and give them a hearty handshake, even if there's a line forming behind them. But if I give them the time to let them know that in that moment they are important to me, that echoes for years to come. I have found, Brad, that also it's just a matter of being a good human being. So, like, business aside, it's nice to be nice to people, but it does. What I'm saying is it echoes through the years ahead, right? So there's that. But also, being kind and responsive on social media has 1,000 benefits in that you're a person. You're not a corporation, and you can respond in all sorts of the myriad ways that a person does, and that realness, that genuineness, has a lovely effect towards building a fan reader or fan to artist relationship. But I will also say, and I think this is happening for Brad as the years go on, is that sometimes the signal to noise ratio gets lost, in that I could spend a big chunk of my day hitting like on every Instagram comment or responding to every Twitter comment. And I could and I should respond to as many as I can. But there are times where, in order to produce more work, I have to not comment. Right, Brad?
Yeah, although I have not hit that point yet.
Right. Well,
I don't think I get as many comments as a lot of other comics people do. So I'm not sure I've hit that point. Although what I will say is that I do end up not responding to certain comments and responding to others. But for me, it's more of a behavior modification exercise. In other words, there are certain comments I want to encourage, and certain types of comments I want to filter to the bottom of the tank and actually actively discourage that person sending the message from sending that
right.
kind of message. I think it's pretty important to keep your finger on the pulse if you're going to be doing social media. I think part of that is responding to the types of messages that you want to keep coming and promote. So I would be very, very cautious about telling anyone to pull away from that, because that's really what you're there for. Think of how long it took you to get the people to start commenting on your stuff on Instagram, for example. It would not be a great idea to pull back entirely from that. Although, when I look at your Instagram feed and my Instagram feed, we're talking about two different volumes of commenting. And I don't know that I'd have the same opinion if I was dealing with your level of commentary.
Well, no, yeah, I think let's set some base goal lines here, and I think this will be helpful. I think both Brad and I agree that as much as you are physically able, you should respond and be social on social media,
Yeah.
and encourage that fandom, encourage the conversation, encourage the niceties, all that sort of stuff, right? So, as much as you are physically able, I would propose try to respond to all the comments, right? That's my baseline. But then, as a secondary level, I would say it's kind of like the two rules of robotics. Do all that unless any form of commenting or any volume of commenting is keeping you from creating or keeping you
Yeah.
from wanting to create.
Yeah.
Because let's also acknowledge the other unspoken thing here. This is two straight white guys talking about their life on social media.
Yeah.
There are people, and we have to acknowledge it, that have a very different reaction. Just by nature of their very existence, they create a shitstorm of weird and angry people coming at them online. And so, if social media you find is an unending slog of people bringing negativity or people bringing anger at you, for God's sakes, you do not have to engage in that fight to the virtue of building their career. There's one cartoonist friend that we have, Brad, who she actually hires someone to look through her feed for her because she gets such levels of, frankly, shit thrown at her.
Yeah.
And it was negatively impacting her. And I thought, what a smart move. Like,
Yes.
I know I need to keep abreast of it, but I don't want to swim in that. So I'm just going
Right.
to, and it's kind of a Gamergate-ish type reaction for those people that were wondering what I'm talking about. Anyway, what I'm getting at is do it, stay engaged, use social media, comment on all the things, unless for any reason at all, it's diminishing your joy for creating and cartooning or your ability to create and cartoon. So if it's keeping you back from both a time management perspective or from an emotional and psychological perspective, then
Yeah.
pull back. Don't you think, Brad? That's probably the good limiter, the second sort of
Oh, yeah.
rule of robotic there.
I'm glad you put it that way, because that really is a good way to think of it. At some point, at the end of the day, the most important thing you're doing is your comic. If any part of this whole thing that we're talking about, social media, merchandising, publishing is kind of important too. But if anything gets to the point where it's detracting from that, you've got to take a long, hard look at it and
Right.
bring that stuff back into balance so that you can do everything that you're trying to do without knocking yourself out. You know, you cannot get so involved in keeping up with the comments that you're detracting from your comic itself.
And because the bottom line here, and I think it's a version of what we said before, which is if you lose the joy for the comic, it's going to come through on the comic. So if for whatever reason the responding to all the comments or handling all the social media is keeping you from having the joy of creativity or actually creating, then drop it. Drop it like a I don't know. What do you drop?
Drop it like it's hot. That's the word you're looking for. Drop it like it's hot.
I was not thinking about drop it like it. I guess it is. Drop it like it's hot has different connotations. Drop it like it's uncomfortable to carry around. That makes me sound like an old man. Brad proposes drop it like it's hot, and I go, no, drop it like it's uncomfortable to carry around. That's what you want to say. Drop it like it's,
Drop it like it's an invitation to a date with Brad Geiger. Drop it that quickly. Dave, our next question comes in from Red, who says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. How aware of using existing brands would you need to be with a long-form webcomic existing in a more modernized setting? For example, I know that DC Comics used $Sun to replace the name Starbucks. Sometimes the Apple logo gets drawn as a pear by some cartoonists. And is brand replacement more for legal reasons or to avoid your readers from suspecting product placement?" So what do you think, Dave? What do you think about this whole brand replacement idea?
Okay, so there's a lot to talk about here. Most people would be accepting of the fact that if you use real brands to make real jokes about real things, that's fine. Yeah. And in a public sphere, the law would support you on most things. Now, problems that you might run into if you use real brands, products, and trademarks is like, remember when Penny Arcade used one trademark branded thing to make fun of a second branded trademark? And they got a cease and desist because that limits the sort of free speech rights of how you can use it. You can, it's akin to, I can make fun of Starbucks in the public sphere. No judge would have a problem with that, but I can't use strawberry shortcake to make fun of Starbucks, because then strawberry shortcake's like, why are you involving me in this? I don't want to, don't drag me into this. If you're not making fun of me, then it's not a public criticism of strawberry shortcake. It's just employing their trademarks and their copyrights. And that's where it gets tricky, right? So with that small caveat, let's look at television. Why does television use brand replacement? Well, the reasons are twofold. One is sponsorships. If they have a TV show that mentions Starbucks, they can never run a commercial between the breaks for any other coffee company, because they're like, wait a minute, why am I paying to pay for your advertising slot on Friends when inside of Friends you're talking about Starbucks? That's not
right.
So instead, as an advertiser, I would like you to just call it $Sun or whatever it is that DC uses, right? So that's option number one.
Yep.
Option number two is if you make a joke that frankly is not worth the lawsuit. And so companies can still, for all their rights, it doesn't matter if they're going to win in court, but they might try some kind of a slap type lawsuit that just stops you from commenting. Mm-hmm. So Starbucks, if you're continually making fun of Starbucks on Friends, they could try some sort of lawsuit that would keep you from doing it. Now, whether or not it holds up in court, it might still stop you, because eventually your lawyers would be like, I don't want to pay for this anymore. Can we just use a different name? So that's another consideration, is you might just want to use a clever, and everyone in society would winkingly know that it's not Starbucks, it's Garlux, Garlux Coffee, and the logo would be just legally distinguishable enough where you could survive a lawsuit. Anyway, so Brad, go ahead. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are this: if you're under 30, Friends was a sitcom that was popular 25
Brad,
years
Friends
ago.
is the most popular streamed show going right now. Don't you call me to the mat on that.
25 years ago, it was on television.
Just because I said drop it like it's something heavy and uncomfortable to carry instead of drop it like it's hot. I am not that old, Brad.
It had 5 characters.
Wow, he's still going with the joke.
No, I think Dave.
Hold on, no, keep going with this. What were the 5 characters, Brad, on Friends? What were the 5 characters?
Joey, Chandler.
Yep.
There was Joey, Chandler, Monica, Jennifer Aniston, Phoebe, and the dork that everybody hated.
I love that Grandpa was like, yeah, Joey, Chandler, Jennifer Aniston. That's all he can remember. What a great diving out of that. Anyway, all right, but go ahead, Brad. What are your thoughts on this? Product
I think you
replacement in a comic.
I don't think we need to belabor it. I think you knocked it out of the park. I think that absolutely when you're selling sponsorship or you're selling ads, that you're not going to give away a free sponsorship. I guarantee you that's how somebody at DC Comics is looking at it. They're saying, don't give Starbucks a free ad if we'll never get them to buy an ad. And as a matter of fact, Dave, we had a talk just a few episodes ago where we said, oh, the Snuffy Smith comic strip, right? They always say it's got to be Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. I wonder why that is. And I was listening to our show because, listen, I think I love the sound of my own voice. I was listening to our show. And I realized as I heard myself ask the question, what the answer was. Dave, why do they have to keep using Barney Google and Snuffy Smith? What's Barney's last name again?
Smith.
No, Barney. And thanks for joining the show. Snuffy Smith and Barney who? See, I've
just woken up from a nap.
This is the beautiful thing about having you on FaceTime. Your head was down. You were writing something. You weren't paying any attention.
Because I was thinking to myself, I want to make clear. But okay, let's finish your Google. Your Google point about the Northern California company Google. I know where you're going with this. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
They've got it. They're probably doing that to protect their copyright because the last name of Barney Google is a very usable name, and they've got to keep that front and center.
Barney Google with the googly eyes, Brad.
Yeah.
That hit from 1922. Do you remember that one? No one does. Dave Kellett, comics historian, boring everybody in the audience. Barney Google with the googly eyes was a jazzy hit from 1922.
What was Barney Google's horse's name?
Wait. Hold on. Peanut, Snuffy. Wait, hold on.
Your brain is working right. What was Barney Google's horse's name?
He won the famous horse race in Barney Google, right? Hold on.
Charles
Schultz, Sparky. Spark Plug. Charles Schultz is nicknamed Sparky after the horse Sparkplug in Barney Google, right?
That's right. That's when you said peanuts. I'm like, you're on the right track.
What a dumb series of facts we've just shared with everyone. What I was going to say was, though, I want to put a button on this, is that you can use brands in your comic as long as it is, courts will very likely hold it up in court if it's social commentary, especially about the brand itself or the perception around the brand, right? You'll hold up it in court. But where it gets a little fuzzier is when it's not social commentary, for example, but it dings the product's reputation, or it starts to siphon some of the goodwill around that product, or misleads people about the product and what it does. That tends to lose in court. But I just want to clarify with that, because there are a couple legal issues around using a brand in a comic. You can't have it recurring. That's another thing. It can't be like, I'm making a social commentary about Starbucks, and now Starbucks is in every comic. A court will be like, now it's no longer social commentary. Now you're just using Starbucks as a character or a brand or a location. That's not cool. Basically, use common sense here, because your common sense will often lead you to the right legal conclusion, which is that you can't permanently use a brand. You can't permanently ding it. It has to be kind of a you're in, you're out kind of a social commentary. You get your shot in and then you go. Don't you think, Brad?
Right. But if you're avoiding it because DC Comics avoids it, again, you're not understanding the why behind the what. if your character drinks coffee and you just put a little sketch of the Starbucks logo on there, you're really not going to hurt yourself. And unless you're planning on selling a sponsorship to Starbucks or any other competing coffee brand, you're not hurting yourself there either. There's
Right.
really no real reason for you to avoid that. Again, unless you're getting into that zone where Dave says you're overstepping your bounds, and then you got to watch it. But if you're avoiding it just because DC Comics avoids it, I think you're worrying too much.
And you know what? Brad once again used that brilliant phrase, understand the why behind the what. And so that actually triggered a thought. Okay, why does DC call it Sundial Comics or Sundial Coffee? Sundollars Comics. Part of the reason is they're not making a particular social commentary. They just want to show Batman walking out of a coffee shop, right? So that's one reason. The second reason is now that they've established Sundollars as a brand in DC, now Sinestro can make some sort of poison coffee that gets the whole populace, and it's not besmirching the name of Starbucks because that's not necessarily needed to be highlighted. They just need a coffee shop. So now you understand the why DC does it behind the what. If they're not necessarily taking a social commentary shot at Starbucks, then they don't need to involve them at all.
Dave, our next Patreon question from one of our Patreon backers comes in from Khalid, who says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. How do you feel about paying another cartoonist for an ad at the end of one of their posts on Instagram? I've tried this several times and have received around 300 new followers. I agree that paying for advertising through Instagram directly is a bad idea, but should I continue putting ads in other comic strips posts regularly to help grow my audience?"
Well, this is an interesting question because I feel like the answer is in the question.
Yeah, don't you think?
Didn't Khalid this is Khalid what the question sounded like. Now, this may be unfair, but this is what it sounded like. It's like, I'm enjoying this sandwich. I bought this sandwich from a shop. The shop made the sandwich delicious, and I now have a happy belly. Should I go back to this place that made this sandwich?
Should I head for the nearest restroom and burp it up? No, that's a good sandwich you got there, my friend. Keep going with that sandwich.
I guess what I'm saying, Khalid, and I'm joking in friendship, but if the question is if you feel like you've spent too much money, or is it good money after bad kind of a thing, then yes. If you feel like I don't want to spend more money, then don't advertise anymore. But if you are happy with and I don't know what amount you spent, but if you are happy with the return per reader, and a helpful metric might be, how much did it cost you to get 300 new followers, right? Like, was it 5 cents each? Was it 25 cents each? Was it $5 each, right? You can see a rapid diminishment in the expenditure costs if they're anything above, 5-10 cents per reader. But if you didn't pay that much to get those 300 readers, I would say go for it.
This is another great way to talk, behind the scenes. So why do we rail against using advertising, like to advertise your website, or boosting a Facebook post by putting ad money into that? Why do we rail against that, but we're for this? Well, two reasons that I would cite. Number one, you'd want to take a look at retention, because the whole reason I'm against advertising my website, for example, on Google AdSense, is that the retention isn't there. I could drive my page views up, but as soon as I stop paying that money, my page views plummet, because I'm not actually retaining those readers. I'm getting people to come over, but they for whatever reason, they're not really predisposed to be my readers, and so they end up bouncing. Okay, and the other part of that is like boosting a Facebook post. You've got the same situation. A lot of the people you're reaching may not really be all that into what you're doing. And as soon as the money stops, boom, it goes down. So if you are retaining those 300 new followers you got, I'd say that's money actually well spent, because number one, you know that it's going out to actual people, and you're not worried about it being clicked on by click farms on Facebook, for example. You know that when you're dealing directly with another cartoonist who has built their own readership up, you've got a much better guess as to the quality of who you're reaching out to.
Right.
And you've got a situation where you can track your churn, whether you're keeping those people or not. If you're keeping those followers, those are real followers. That's actually, I would say, and it's something that I would actually endorse. Is this idea of doing this with another cartoonist? Number one, you're paying money to another cartoonist. That's a good thing. And if you're retaining those people, this is something that you can hang your hat on. And it's the whole reason you're on social media.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that Brad said there, and I don't know if he's put it in this phrase, but those readers are pre-filtered. These are people that have already shown us an explicit interest in a comic that at least you feel is somewhat thematically or stylistically similar to your work, such that you want to advertise it. So they have shown themselves to be comic fans and recurring or stick-to-itiveness comic fans. They'll stick with an artist once they found them, right? Which is maybe not the case with someone that you get on paid for advertising on a platform, right? Like maybe they've expressed an interest in superheroes broadly, but they don't want to read what Brad is creating with Evil Link. They happen to like Batman, so they put that on their Instagram or Facebook profile, right? And so then the algorithm triggers that, and they get included in your ad buy. But also, I want to talk about platform. Why Brad and I are suspicious about platform with something like Facebook when they got caught recently lying about their video numbers.
Yes.
It's akin to, for me, and this is going to sound a little conspiratorial, but I don't think it is. It's akin to what happened when Wells Fargo had that trouble a few years ago, is when you have a corporate culture that is encouraging lying or necessitating lying from this or that department to please their vice president. It has to raise for you as a consumer a lot of hackles about what else am I not hearing about that this culture of pressure and lying is producing that I haven't yet heard about. And so one of the things that we hold off on buying ads from Instagram or Facebook or Twitter is a lot of their practices in allowing bots on their network, because they could get rid of them and they don't
easily.
They getting rid of click farms because they could get rid of them and they don't. Is what culture is necessitating that happening? What culture is necessitating lying about video click-throughs for like College Humor? What's causing that? And so if you take a second and think about the kind of financial pressures that they're working under to try to show a growing and expanding network of active users, and they're all, and you can see that like it's infinitely better to buy from a cartoonist that you know is a flesh and blood person who might even give you that little personal touch. They might even, like, I've seen Chris Hallbeck say after a sponsorship, for example, on his Instagram, he runs the ad, but then he's like, boy, I really like this cartoon. This is great. I personally enjoy this one, and so that sometimes those little extra nudges you're not going to get that from a platform, but you'll get it from another cartoonist. And so, Khalid, I think to put a button on this, I think if you enjoyed the process, if you like the artist that you were supporting with their advertising, and if they brought you in readers at a rate that you found acceptable and they seem to be sticking around, and by the way, give it a month or two and see if they stick around. But if they're sticking around, then maybe repeat the process. Always making sure to keep it within a financially reasonable way so that you're not spending more than you or anyone in your life would take umbrage with. But on that note, Brad, I think that puts a button on the day. What do you think?
I think that's buttoned up. And we come to a part of the show that we like to call Thanks for the Kind Words. Dave, did you see this on Twitter just a while ago? It comes from Lindsay Hornsby, who says, hey, comic friends, I can't recommend ComicLab podcast enough when it comes to having nice comic making advice happening while you're working. I back them on Patreon because they're swell guys with solid knowledge. For real, she continues. I've been chewing through the archives, and listen to this. This is why I wanted to bring this up. The one from last month where Brad and Dave discussed the dangers of, quote, never give up, always be drawing, unquote, is very refreshing to hear from someone who's gotten sick multiple times over the last 6 months. Now, how good is that to hear?
That's great, because I, just not to go back on topics, A, thank you for the kind words, but B, just to repeat the point, I drove my own body physically to the point of having nerve damage and circulatory damage from my drawing. So I'm so glad to hear that our comments are reinforcing for another artist that they can take a break if their body is telling them to take a break. Listen to your health, listen to the people in your life, your loves, and those come before your cartooning. So
yes.
Anyway,
and
thank
remember
you.
what we said at the top of the show about intermittent updates. You don't have to feel like you got to do this comic this week. Those readers are going to be there next week. If you're sick this week, take care of yourself. You're in a different publishing atmosphere. I can't emphasize that enough. Your readers are sitting in front of a smorgasbord. They ain't going to miss you this week. Take care of yourself and take care of being able to do this. Listen to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my chum, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And the delightful Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the sponsor once again for today is Sideshow's Sideshow Podcast with comedian Jeff May. Do go check them out. Give them your support. They can be found at side.show/comiclab. Once again, that's side.show/comiclab. Sideshow's Sideshow Podcast with Jeff May. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever-wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab. Yeah, I liked that. I liked that one from Lindsay, but I got beaten up in junior high by by another student named Lindsay.
Oh my God, we're never going to be able to take a question again from anybody, a question or comment like, well, Brad, this question comes in from Khalid, and Brad's like, I had a Khalid pop me in the nose one time, broke my nose. Brad, it's your question. Khalid likes the show. He's submitting a question. No, I can't answer from Khalid. Khalid, bro. And then, all right, we got Lindsay writing in, Brad. No, I can't. Lindsay pants me in third grade. I can't take a question from a Lindsay. Brad,
yeah, it's just like as soon as I hear the name, I shriek in terror. Brad, we've got this one coming in from Jeffrey. Ah! Oh, sorry. I didn't know that was another Jeffrey.
In a Warner Brothers way, you just see a cloud of smoke in front of Brad's microphone and the headphones just spinning as Brad runs off, running away.
Whoop, 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 whoop.